for the second leg of the doubleheader. You saw me earlier today with Joel Gargiulo, and if you're not sick of me yet, well, good news. I'm back for more. If you haven't checked out that episode, welcome back to the Mike the New Haven podcast. Of course, ladies and gentlemen, this is episode 182. Check it out. Joel was short on time, but we still managed to squeeze in a good close to a half-hour interview with her, which was nice to finally get her on the show. And like I mentioned earlier, if you haven't checked out the last two shows from last week, it was volumes 12 and 13 of the E-Men inside the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit, Lieutenant Al Baker, who ran the entire unit and the Specialized Training School for volume 12, and Glenn Klein for volume 13, who was a veteran of 10 Truck, was featured in an episode of Cops, and he paid tribute to two of his colleagues from 10 Truck, Tommy Langone and Paul Talty, who lost their lives on 9/11. So keeping up with the news theme of today's doubleheader, we had Joel first, like I said, and we have my next guest, who is a well-tenured veteran of the news business in New York City, a journalist who saw great Gotham with no filter. She made history by being New York One's first on-camera hire in 1992. She's no stranger to the news business. That wasn't her first endeavor into the news business, however, as she was previously an anchor and reporter prior to New York One, enjoying stints at both WCBS and News 12 Long Island. And besides her career in news, she is a theater critic to match, having run a theater company previously for 3 years with her now husband, and that is Miss Roma Torre, who joins me now on the Mike the New Haven podcast. Roma, welcome. How are you?
I'm very well, Michael. Thank you. I saw your interview with Joelle earlier today. It was great. She's lovely.
She is. She's very sweet.
I wasn't familiar with her, but I will be now.
Yeah, she's on New York Live, and for those of you out there, as you heard me mention earlier, check her out. She's on Monday through Friday, 11:30 to noon. So, of course, we were talking off the air. I'm a very happy man because I get to interview you tonight. I'm also a New York Rangers fan. They came back and won the series in 7 games. You, despite being born in New York City, you're raised primarily in Pittsburgh, family full of Penguin fans. Take me through those early years.
That really hurt. That really hurt. We were rooting. We thought last week they had it in the bag, right? It was
I did too.
3-1, and we figured, okay, just one more game. And then Sunday came along, and oh my God. So they tied it up then Sunday, and they were winning. All they do was hang on to that lead, and then they lost in the overtime. And that was hurting. I'm sorry, New York. I feel like a traitor when I say this, but Pittsburgh I regard a little bit more as my hometown because we moved from New York City to Pittsburgh when I was only about 5 years old. So I do identify with Pittsburgh.
Well, that's fine. That's fine. Listen, it could be worse. You could be a Devils fan. You could also be a Islanders fan. So you're not either one of those. So we'll let it slide here. And
no, like I was saying, we love the Yankees. We love the Yankees. Okay.
There we go. We agree on that. Agree on that. And the Yankees are loving us back right now because
oh my God, aren't they? Wow. Yes. Way to go.
So, your path is interesting because you're the daughter of a newswoman, and she was wrongly imprisoned at one time for her work. And that was certainly an early inspiration for you. For those of us that don't know her background, why don't you expand on who she was?
Well, I'll give you the short story because my mom's story is really pretty incredible. But she was a newswoman at a time when the news business was dominated by men. Yeah. And she rose through the ranks because she was very talented. And she ended up with a column. She had a syndicated column in the New York Herald Tribune in the 1950s. And because she was a woman, she was relegated to doing the soft stuff. And she was the amusements editor. So she was covering the entertainment scene in New York. She wanted so badly to do hard news, but her editors wouldn't allow it. And they said, nope, you're a woman, you stick with the soft stuff. So she ended up writing a column about Judy Garland. And you know who Judy Garland is. Right? Okay. I asked because I was being interviewed by a young college student. And when I mentioned the name Judy Garland, his eyes glazed over. And I was like, oh my goodness, you don't know Judy Garland?
Great actress.
The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy. And he was like, oh, her. Yeah, right. Okay. Anyway, so at the time, Judy was, at the height of her fame, and she was supposed to do a special for CBS, and she was dragging her feet on it. And then they claimed she was in breach of contract. So my mother did the story with a source from CBS reporting what he had said about Judy. And then my mom went to Judy and her husband, who was her manager at the time, and they had no comment. And the story ran front page. It was a really big story because she was so famous. And then they were very upset about the reception that article got. And so my mom offered to give them a whole column to themselves, and they refused. And they then turned around and sued the newspaper. They sued CBS. And in order for the suit to follow through, they needed my mom to reveal her source at CBS, and my mom refused. It is, the cardinal rule of journalism: you do not reveal your confidential sources. And so the case, she was cited for contempt of court because she was ordered to reveal the source by the judge, and she said, no, I can't do that. And it went all the way to the Supreme Court, believe it or not. They refused to review the case. They weren't ready to deal with freedom of the press and the newspaper sources. And so it reverted back to the lower court, and my mom was sent to jail. And the interesting thing about that story is that she was sent to jail in Hudson County, New Jersey. New Jersey had a shield law that would have protected her from having to reveal her sources. New York obviously didn't have a shield law, but so she was in a state where she didn't break any laws, where whatever she did was not regarded as illegal. So, but it was a huge case, and she had a lot of attention because it was the first time a reporter had gone to jail in a First Amendment case, refusing to reveal a source of information ever in this country. And so that was a big deal. It put her on the map. She was a national celebrity as a result of that. And so after, it was a 30-day sentence, but the judge got so much hate mail. My brother, I was just born. My brother was only a year older than me. And it looked like they were persecuting this young female journalist. And so he knocked the sentence down to about 10 days. So she spent 10 days in jail. And it was great. She wrote a book about it, and the book did very, very well in the 1960s. And she regards herself as a hero for doing that.
As she should. As she absolutely should. I should say, for those of you watching either through LinkedIn, YouTube, or for the first time tonight, we're also live on Twitter. If you have a question for Roma, fire it away in the chat, and I'll make sure she sees it. Shout out, of course, in the chat to Bill Ryan of the Ryan Investigative Group, retired NYPD first-grade detective out of the Arson Explosion Squad, sister squad of the Bomb Squad. Raquel Pranzo's here, and her better half, retired NYPD street crime lieutenant and author. Peter Pranzo's here as well, and she says, Raquel Pranzo, that is some story. God bless your mom for sticking to her gun. She taught you well. You should be proud of how far you have come. Role model for women. Thank you, Raquel. That's a nice comment.
You know what? I should add to that. What she did was a very bold and principled decision, but she was even people that were very highly principled were advising her to reveal the source, and their position was, you're a young mother, you don't need to go to jail, it's not worth it, blah, blah, blah. And my mom kept saying, this is a principle, this is sacred, this is sacrosanct in my business. I would never reveal a source under any circumstances. But one of her very close friends was a lawyer, a very famous lawyer named Joseph N. Welch. I don't know if the name means anything to you, but he in the Army McCarthy hearings, he was the lawyer who represented the Army. And he had famously said, if there's a God in heaven, or have you no decency, have you no decency, Senator McCarthy. Do you remember that?
Yes.
When they were going back and forth. Anyway, he said to my mother, stop acting like an agitated housewife and just give the man's name, for God's sake. And, my mom was really disappointed when he said that, because she admired him so greatly. But I think, women were just held to a lower standard back in those days. And it's unfortunate, but
it is
my idol, and she taught me a lot, and I'll take that to my grave.
Detective Ryan wants to know, what is your mother's name?
Oh, yeah. Marie Torre. And if you Google her, you will see a newsreel story, and it's sort of just a thumbnail clip of my mother's story with the whole jail incident. It's only like a minute or two, but you get the whole story in a minute. Cliff Robertson, the actor, narrated it. So you'll get the whole story, and you'll see her picture, and it was a big case back then.
So we're talking with Roma Torre here in the Mike the New Haven podcast. This is episode 182. As you got older, obviously you mentioned you were 4 when this happened. And once you were cognizant of what she went through, and maybe for the first time you mentioned, I want to do what you do, Mom. Was she supportive? If that conversation took place, was she supportive, or given what she had to go through and endure, was she apprehensive when you mentioned it to her?
No, well, first of all, all kids are a little rebellious when they're growing up. And last thing I wanted to do was get into my mom's business. Also because she ended up in Pittsburgh, by the way, the first female reporter in local news to cover hard news. So after her celebrity with the case and she got out of jail, she had a lot of offers. And one of the offers was to become a reporter anchor at a local news channel. And so, believe it or not, she was offered Pittsburgh and Chicago and Philadelphia and I think Los Angeles, and she chose Pittsburgh. And back then it was all smoggy and it was a terrible city to live in at that time in the 60s. But my brother and I were very young, and she said, what city has the best school system? She wanted us to go into a public school system, and so she chose Pittsburgh. But she was the first woman anchor in Pittsburgh, and she covered news. TV Guide had an ad for her, and it said, meet our newest reporter and anchor woman. She covers news like a man. And you saw her in the picture, cigarette in one hand and a scotch in the other. But she was so happy because she finally got a chance to cover hard news like a man. Yeah.
And you could never fathom something like that happening today. I mean, it seems unheard of. But back then, unfortunately, that was the norm.
Oh, definitely. But anyway, she made her mark, and she was highly respected. And so all that time growing up, I was in her shadow, and I hated the celebrity aspect of it. There's no place my mother could go without people reaching out to her and wanting an autograph and and getting close to her celebrity. And I really resented it. So it was the last business I wanted to go into. My field was theater, was acting, and I wanted to be an actress for a long time. And my mom was great. I'm blessed. My mom was just the best mom anybody could ever have, because she was always there for us, and yet she was a career woman and she worked really hard. But the acting didn't pan out as much as I wanted it. And at some point, and there was a turning point in there, I told my mom I thought maybe I should not be acting anymore. And she was the one that encouraged me to go into the news business. And I'm grateful for her. And you know what? It must be in my blood, because it came pretty naturally.
Yeah, look what you've accomplished. That's what I was about to say. Mary Susan Schilling, tuning in via LinkedIn, she says, your mom had great strength and integrity. She's a hero. She taught you well, Roma. The apple didn't far fall from the tree. Thank you, Mary, for submitting that comment.
Oh, Mary.
So that said, I mean, while you were at Tufts, you spent 4 years at Tufts University, and you were running a theater company. It's not just one thing to be in theater. You had a hand in running an entire company. Now, given what would come later, granted, you were never an executive producer or anything like that, but still you had a lot of responsibilities in the news business. How do you feel that experience helped shape you for what would come later?
Well, interestingly, I mean, the theater company didn't last too long, only because I really wanted to be taken seriously as an actress. And so my husband was writing plays and directing them, and I was acting in them in the theater company. But at some point, I just decided after 3 years, I wanted to come to New York and try my luck here in the Big Apple. And so I kind of left the business end of the theater. But I will tell you, it informed my work as a theater critic, because I realized how collaborative the whole process is in putting on a show. And so as a theater critic, I try not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, if a show is no good, then I'm not going to pan it roundly. I'm going to call out the parts of the show that were successful, the acting, maybe it's just the lighting or the set or whatever. But I feel it's my responsibility as a theater critic to call out the good and, call out the bad. And also there's sort of a consumer element to my theater reviewing. I know I'm going on a tangent, but it just, I just wanted to make this clear that when I did my theater reviews, I wanted to sort of identify the ideal audience for a particular show. Because, something could be really, really worth seeing and yet not your cup of tea, right? So I wanted to make sure that the whatever show I was reviewing matched the taste of a particular audience, and I tried to identify who would appreciate that work. So, but anyway, I got all of that from doing the theater company. I realized that it takes a lot of effort, and maybe the play is bad, but the performances are great, and that should be called out. That's what makes it.
Well, first of all, we love tangents here on the Mike the New Haven podcast. It's appreciated because I don't want to do that much talking. If the guest is doing all the talking, that means it's a good show, as I've said before. And secondly, I liken it to, I guess you could say, a baseball team, right? Like, for example, we're both Yankee fans. Everybody else in the Yankees is doing their job. Not to pick on him. I hate Joey Gallo. Joey Gallo stinks, but so you might be able to call out his that. So you might be able to call out that aspect of his performance. Although, to be fair, he's played a little bit better lately, but you can still point out the fact that the Yankees are 26-9. Hopefully 27-9 after tonight. Hopefully we will see.
Best record in baseball. Wow.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean anything if they don't finish the job in October. I've been through pain with them before in recent years, so hopefully it's a different story. But it's a good comparison, nevertheless. So I guess that brings us to the spring of 1984. You're getting to WCBS during a rocking time in the city. I mean, crime is through the roof, so that beat is filled to the brim. I mean, we're not too far removed from the corruption of the 70s that plagued the NYPD. This is a great time, even though it's not a great time for the city. It's a great time to be a reporter in the city because you're never going to be bored. But you started out as a production assistant. Now, again, walking in there, trying to produce this newscast that's filled with so many legends. Jim Jensen, I believe, is there at the time.
Oh, yeah.
As an example, being in such company, it's kind of like when I had John on, he compared it to walking into NBC and dealing with the 27 Yankees. So for you, did you feel the same? Was it intimidating at all?
It was very intimidating. Though I need to correct you. When I finally realized, actually, my mom had said to me, because I was offered a nude role in a movie and I turned it down because I just didn't want to be seen naked on screen by a million people. And my mother had said to me, I not that I ever want to see you with your clothes off, but she said, if you're going to be that way and you've chosen acting as a profession and you're creating limitations for yourself, maybe you ought to reconsider your career goals. And so at that point, she was encouraging me to get into her business. And so I had said, I'm sorry, my dog is barking.
It's all right.
I had said to her at the time, I want to do this on my own. I don't want you to help me. And because if I'm any good, I'll know, but it'll be on my terms. So I sent resumes out all over the place. And I got an interview at WCBS, Channel 2 News, with the news director, and we really hit it off. But at the time, they were dealing with a hiring freeze, and he said, I can't offer you a production assistant job that you want or a researcher job, but I can offer you the job of being my secretary. And I was like, oh, God, miracle. I really didn't want to do that, but I was pretty good at it. And the sad part is I was so good at it, they didn't want to let me move on, and I had expressed an interest in, right early on, I had expressed an interest in becoming a writer. I wanted to write. And so they said, well, as soon as the hiring freeze ends, we'll let you become a writer. And so that took a while, and I finally did get to be a writer. So yes, I will tell you, I was very intimidated during that whole period because my long-term goal was to get on the air, was to be a reporter. And they were all so good, all of them, and I would beg to go out with the reporters and, see, I remember Diane Diamond took me out, Tony Guida. I mean, these guys were they were heroes of mine. And so I almost got out of it. I almost just dropped out of it because I just felt I could not measure up. And then having my mother at the same time, and I have to be honest with you, I will never be as good as my mom. She was incredible. When you see reporters doing their stand-ups, you call them stand-ups in front of a camera, she was one take Tory. My mom just would just speak, and there was never any, take two. There was never It was always just straight. So I will never be as good as she is. But I was working with people just like that who were so incredibly talented and professional. So it set me back a little bit. I was really nervous, but I thought, well, I might as well give it a shot. And my mom was pushing for it. She was very proud of me. And so, yeah, I convinced some of the camera folk there, the camera guys, to let me go out with them and shoot some stand-ups. And then I was using the footage from other reporters' stories and re-editing them together. And that's how I was able to put a reel together to apply for jobs around the country. And I'll tell you another thing. I applied to Nome, Alaska, and nobody wanted to hire me. Back in those days, there was no internet or anything. So I had my 3/4-inch tapes, and I was trucking all over the country. My husband and I drove all the way up the East Coast to Maine, and I was dropping off tapes to all of the news directors trying to get myself a job on the air, and nobody wanted me. I don't even know if they ever even looked at the tapes, to be honest with you, but it was really frustrating. And I'll just jump ahead. If you want to know how I got my first job on camera.
Sure, go ahead. Take any direction you want to take it in. It's fine by me.
Okay. Well, I mean, I don't want to talk your ear off.
That's the point. I want you to.
All right. Well, anyway, when I was at Channel 2, I made a lot of friends. And one of them was James Brady. I don't know if you remember him. He passed away quite a few years ago.
Was he shot along with Reagan in '81?
Yeah,
James Brady.
James Brady.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
But you did get it. He was the press secretary for Reagan. He was shot when there was that assassination attempt. Yes, remember? Anyway, no. The James Brady I'm speaking of was a novelist, and he was a columnist, and I think he's credited with starting Page 6 in the Post. He's the guy, the man. Anyway, he was working at Channel 2 doing celebrity interviews, and he became a good friend of mine. And so in one of his latest books, they were having a book party to celebrate him, and he invited me. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to go, but my husband's a writer, and I thought, well, this would be good for him. So I dragged him along to the party. And while I was there, I saw an agent that I was trying to get to represent me, and it hadn't worked out at that point. And we'd been in touch, but he wasn't really following through. And so at the party, I just decided, you know what, I see the agent, but he's surrounded by a lot of people, and I'm not going to mess with him. So I started to walk out. And as I did, Jim Brady grabbed me by the arm, and he said, Roma, there's an agent here. I want you to meet him. Maybe he can help you. And so he pushed through the crowd. He dragged me over, and it was Al Primo. And he said, Al, I want you to meet Roma. She's looking for a job as a reporter on air. And Al looked at me and he said, oh my God, you're so pretty. I didn't recognize you. Jesus.
Which would never fly today.
I don't think he will never admit that, I'm sure. But anyway, he said, you want a job? You want to be on TV? And I was like, yeah. And he said, well, News 12 is starting in Long Island, and I think I can get you in there. And the very next day, I got myself an interview with Al Idelson, who was this wonderful, wonderful man. Was the news director at that time, and I got hired right away. And it was just, isn't it funny, serendipity, the way things work? No matter how talented you are, it's timing. Everything is timing. Your luck is being there.
Yeah, of course. We're talking with Roma Torre here tonight in the Mike the New Haven podcast. This is episode 182. And like I said earlier, if you have a question for her, please fire it away in the chat. I'll make sure she sees it. We're live tonight via YouTube, LinkedIn, and for the first time, as I mentioned earlier, Twitter. So, it's interesting because your first time on camera, most people would be pretty nervous. But you come from that acting background where part of it is, well, you're in front of a crowd, you're performing. A news shot, especially a live one, is kind of similar. Given your background previously and having done that, did that dissipate your nerves when you had to do that first shot?
No, I was so nervous. Oh my God. I honestly, I don't know why that was. And well, actually, I think I'm going to self-analyze myself. I think it's because I had my mom in my head the whole time, and as she was so good, and I knew that it was going to take a whole lot to match my mom's skill and talent on as a TV reporter. And sure enough, I make a joke about myself. I say if involves Roma Torre, it's going to be the hard way. I've really struggled in my life to get to where I want to go. But my very first live shot, I was sent out. It was Nassau County, and I was sent to interview the new chief of homicide, a guy named John Nolan, who turned out to be a good friend, lovely man. And so I was sent out, and I was going to do a live shot at the police headquarters there. And I'd never lived on Long Island. At that point, I was still living in New York City. So I was unfamiliar with the turf. I was unfamiliar with the personnel. And so I got myself set up, and I went to their press people, and they knew that I was there to interview John Nolan. And so they said, okay, just stand out there. We'll bring him to you. And I said, well, I'm going to be live at the top of the hour. Can you just make sure to bring him over and give me like 5 minutes with him so I can do like a little pre-interview. And they said, yeah, sure. I guess they were messing with me. I don't know. But I'm standing there, and it was 9 o'clock hour, whatever it was in the morning. And there's no John Nolan, there's nobody. And so I told my producer on our IFB that John Nolan's not here, and what do I do? And they said, well, you're live. You're going to just tap dance, and that's the term that they use in the news to just kill time. And I didn't know anything. I did a little homework about the police department there in Nassau County, and I had John Nolan's bio, but so I'm talking and fumfering as badly as you can imagine. And out of my peripheral vision, I could see the press guys walking over with a guy. So I said, oh, this is like, it probably was only like a minute or two that I was tap dancing, but it felt like hours. And they bring this guy over, and I said, well, here we have Captain John Nolan. Congratulations. And he says, Roma, I'm not John Nolan. I'm the chief of police. And I was like, oh my God.
Lovely.
Total idiot. And I was like, oh, well, congratulations on the hire. And I was like, that was my maiden voyage as a newscaster going live. It got better from there. I will tell you, but
oh, for sure. As we'll cover tonight.
My lesson, and it was, oh Lord.
No, yeah, and you know what? As I was telling you off the air, I can appreciate it now. Granted, it's not the same thing, because to borrow a line from Ashley Banfield that she said when she was on this show a few months ago, I'm not even on the totem pole. I'm the grass around it. At least that's what she said she was at the time when she was starting out at MSNBC. That's me now. But even then, I kind of feel the same way when I was telling you off the air. Sometimes guests are late and you're trying to figure it out, and you're live and you're tap dancing, as you were saying. In the past, I would look at the TV, and as you just said, I'd be like, this idiot, how'd they get that job? Now that I'm doing some form of a similar thing, then I can see just how hard it is. And I can appreciate it even all the more so when somebody can successfully tap dance.
Yes, right. I mean, it does. It's quite a skill. And by the way, when you were asking me if the nerves were dissipating since I had the acting background, the acting did help in the respect that I was always so nervous. And I finally said to myself, then act the part of a newscaster, pretend you're performing as a newscaster. And somehow that made it so much easier. So I regarded it as a performance. And I also had some people in mind that were models that I was using in terms of my syntax, the way I would speak. And that really helped. And then over time, you develop your own style. And so it did. That was the trick for me to get me sort of over the hump of, being the amateur to being, a professional newswoman.
Right. And that said, during that 6-year stint in Long Island, there were many notable stories that occurred. I mean, everything that happens in the city to an extent has a connection to the island, because so many people commute into the city to work, or, they lived there previously and they moved out to the island. There was a story in 1990, I believe, where a detective was killed by a car bomb in the line of duty. There was that story. There's also the Long Island Lolita story in 1992.
Joey Buttafuoco.
Yes. Did you cover? Yeah, and Amy Fisher.
We all covered that one.
Yeah, I was about to say. I was going to ask you. Did you cover that story involving Amy Fisher, who went on to a career in theater, but a different kind of theater we're not going to discuss here?
No, that's true. Yeah, yeah, we all covered that one. That was quite the story. Yeah, I was looking back and I saw, um, I, I did a lot of political coverage, and I guess that fed into when I got to New York One. I was sort of the replacement host of our Inside City Hall show. So I really enjoyed politics, and to this day I'm a political junkie. I love. Actually, I would never be a politician, but I love covering politics. I find it fascinating and disturbing at the same time.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So I guess so we can jump into that now. It's 1992. You've been in Long Island for about 6 years now. You've had a great start to your career. You're finally living out your dream. And here comes this new news operation that's starting up in the shadow of, well, dare I say, even News 12, also WCBS, WNBC, WABC. And you were not their first hire per se, but you were certainly their first on-air hire, forgive the background noise. So coming into this operation that's just getting off the ground when you're already well established, I mean, that's a difficult position to be in because you're like, should I take this? What if it goes under? What ultimately led you to take it?
Yeah, well, so interestingly, the reason I got the job at New York One is that it was started by a bunch of guys, or actually two guys in particular, from CBS, from WCBS days, Paul Sagan and Steve Paulus. And they remembered me very well because we worked together those years. And it was also started by a gentleman named Richard Aurelio, who was a deputy mayor under John Lindsay in that administration. And he had always wanted to form a local, a hometown news channel as sort of a gift to the city. He lives on Long Island, as a matter of fact, and he's a wonderful man, and he's still going strong, and I think he's in his 90s. Anyway, the reason I got the job at New York One is that in 1991, we had covered the Avianca plane crash. It was a really horrible story. An Avianca plane bound for Colombia was, I guess, ran out of fuel, and it crashed in John McEnroe's father's backyard. And it just so happened that I lived nearby, and I was awakened in the middle of the night and told, get your ass over there. There's a plane crash. And so we covered the hell out of that story, and we kind of owned it because they closed the roads, and so none of the other media could get by. And so we owned that story, and we won an Emmy for it. So when I was at the Emmy Awards, I ran into my former bosses, and they had mentioned to me that they were going to start this new local cable news channel called New York One, and would I be interested? And the chance to work in New York City, I was like, hell yeah. And so that's how that came about. And they were so great too. They said to me, what would you like to do? And I said that I loved reporting, and it was so fulfilling, but I also knew the money was in anchoring, and I didn't want to pass up an opportunity if it was being offered to me to get in the anchor chair. And because I had done a lot of anchoring at News 12. And so they said, okay, well, we'll make you weekend anchor and 3-day-a-week general assignment reporter. And that was history. And that's how it got started. So I was their first on-camera hire. By the way, I was in the first batch of on-camera hires for News 12 Long Island. So you can call me a cable news pioneer.
No, I think so. And I think it also helps that News 12 is very hyper local, whereas New York One, as I was talking about when our mutual friend Amanda Farinacci was on a little while ago, is also very hyper local. So going from one operation to another that generally, even if the level of stories are different, shares the same philosophy, it had to make for an easier transition even with the new ground up operation.
It absolutely was. The only, what made it difficult though was we were VJs. We had to carry our own cameras, and it's funny, we didn't have to carry our cameras at News 12, and it would have been a lot easier because you can park your car and go over your story. But there's no parking in New York, and when you have to make it to a live shot on time, and you can't park the car and you got to meet the truck. And, and they gave us a hard time about, about illegal parking. And if we got tickets, we were responsible for paying it ourselves, and et cetera, et cetera. So it was a little stressful. It really was. The concept of the one-man band, though, was that it's your vision. You're telling a story, and it's got to have the sound and the video combined. And they felt that when you have a camera person working with you, the reporter, you might be missing some aspect of the story because you didn't shoot it yourself. And so they thought it would be more concise, and it would just make for better reporting if you shot the story by yourself. So we were all taught how to shoot, and I was actually pretty good at it. Killed my back. Back in those days, those cameras were these monsters, and actually they
boom boxes.
Yeah, they were huge, and they recognized that that it was going to wreak havoc on our bodies, and so they gave us an allowance to go to a chiropractor or get some physical therapy. And boy, did I need it. To this day, my back has never been right. And it was thanks to those damn cameras.
You were literally putting New York 1 on your back.
Yes, right. Yeah.
And to your point of
yeah,
there you go. To your point about parking in New York, one of my friends from the Bomb Squad, who'll be on the show in July, was telling me this off the air. He was like, Mike, they offered me to go to a different precinct. He was in I think in the 4-7 in the Bronx. He's like, no. And he's like, why do you want to go to the other precinct? He's like, because this precinct has parking. So it's the only reason he didn't want to leave. It was a better precinct than everything.
It's amazing how a little thing like parking can really ruin your life, darken your career.
I love the city to visit, but I can never live there, and that's one of the reasons why I would lose it. Michael Chan's watching tonight via LinkedIn. He says, Roma is an inspiration, one of the kindest, most generous, and hardest working journalists in the biz. Always smile, always encouraging, and a great mentor to so many folks in front of and behind the camera. Thank you, Mike.
We work together. Mike Chan, great guy, really talented.
Thank you for tuning in, Mike.
And I hope you're doing well, Mike. And Mary, too. Love you guys.
And a few more shout outs in the live chat. Ruth Ann Griffin's here as well, always a big supporter of the show. Steve-O, retired, not from the Jackass show, but rather retired NYPD Lieutenant. Steve-O, good to see you this evening, my friend. Always appreciate you tuning in as well. Another big supporter of the show. So you guys were kind of thrown into the deep end of the pool from 92 to really 97, because think about it. In 93, we get the first attack on the Trade Center with the bombing.
Right.
Of course, there's a contentious mayoral election in 93. We get an epic sports spring in 1994 with the Rangers and the Knicks making a deep run. Rangers winning the cup that year, of course. Then you go into 1996, crash of TWA Flight 800. Giuliani has an affair. His wife is in the news business, so that makes it even more complicated to cover. So those first 5 years were a whirlwind, but we'll start with terrorism. People have familiarity with terrorism because the 80s, as I covered in my Bomb Squad miniseries, the 70s and the 80s, domestic terrorism was fraught in the city, But this was the first time, or one of the first times, Islamic terrorism had affected the city. There was the assassination of Rabbi Kahani in 1990. Now we get the bombing, and it's on New York's biggest landmark. Covering that, I don't know if you were covering it that day, but at least in the days afterward, take me through that.
Well, I happened to be off that day, and I was bumming. I had a eye doctor appointment. It's funny. It's like the Kennedy assassination. You know exactly where you were. Well, you're actually too young.
1963, November 17th.
No, but
or June 17th.
I'm thinking of 9/11. You were you even born? What was?
I was 1.
You were 1 year. Okay, you wouldn't remember it, but I think I was 5 when Kennedy was shot. I remember where I was, and every big story, you remember where you were. So that first bombing, I had an eye doctor appointment, and I had taken the day off, and I was really regretting it. I called in instantly when I heard about it, and I volunteered to go in, but they said, no, we got it covered. I think Elizabeth Caledon was on the desk, and she did a great job. Didn't matter. But we, at that time, I have to say, the New York one was, in those early days, was just so incredible because Steve Paulus in particular had a really good sense of hiring talented newcomers. And he brought in some real gems, a lot of, I guess, diamonds in the rough, a lot of really great reporters who had so much potential but very little experience. And so, like Jonathan Dienst, for example, was our Manhattan reporter. Andrew Kurtzman, went on to write a book about Giuliani, and he has his own consulting firm, but he came from the Daily News. He was a print reporter, had never been on TV before. Elizabeth Caledon was in that first batch with us, and she went on to be a medical reporter at CBS Network. So they had a great sense of who would be good on television. And so those early days were just a blast. And we were a family. We worked so well together. There was such a bond that we created working together. And, it's funny, in those early days, Steve Paulus would gather us together. And I remember I had raised my hand and I said, well, when we do a story, how long can it be? And he said, because, at that time when I was at News 12, they said a story had to be like 2 minutes. And then they wanted to wedge in as many commercials as possible. So it went down from 2 minutes to a minute 45. Then it was like a minute 30. And it was like, you can't tell a story in a minute 30. Anyway, when I asked that question, Steve said, well, you know what? If you tell a story in a minute and a half, and it should have gone 3 minutes, I'm going to let you know that was wrong. And if you tell a story in 3 minutes that should have been in a minute and a half, I'm going to tell you that was wrong. So he was great. He gave us all this, freedom to do our thing. And in those early days, we were the little engine that could. We were chugging along, and we worked so hard, and we were all so young, and we were just so eager and enthusiastic to do the work. And we were cheered on by our management. It was Time Warner at that point, and it was hands off. They didn't tell us what to report, and they gave us the freedom to do what we felt was best. And so those were like the halcyon days of the news business for me. I really enjoyed it. And those stories, my goodness, you name a story, I can tell you exactly where I was, what I was doing at that point. It's emblazoned in my memory.
Roma Torre is our guest tonight on the Mike the New Haven podcast. Now, I mentioned Giuliani, and during that first term is when the news of his affair broke out, or either during the first term or just into the second term. And it's complicated enough to cover it, because if the mayor is having marital trouble, of course, it's going to be big news. But his wife is in the news business. She's a colleague. If you don't know her directly, she's at least a colleague in the fact that she's in the same city, Donna Hanover being her name. In covering a story like that, I mean, you're not TMZ. There has to be a delicacy to this. There has to be a respect factor to this. If not for him, then definitely for her. Given her position, how difficult did it make that story to cover?
Well, let me start with this. When that story broke, Giuliani was in a news conference, and we were live, and I was on set with Andrew Kurtzman, and Giuliani reveals that is separating from his wife. And so we were summarizing that at the end of the press conference, and I turned to Andrew and I said, wow, that was a bombshell. And I said, I wonder if Donna knows. And he said, well, of course she knows. She's the wife. She has to know. And I said, I wouldn't be so sure. The next day in the New York Times, we read that Donna Hanover said, it's news to me. It's like, and I knew it. I just kind of, because I knew Giuliani, and a lot of people gave me a hard time about Giuliani because he was rough in those days. Remember the squeegee men and all that, and a lot of people look at that as a good thing. And as I mentioned, I was doing Inside City Hall, and I would raise that as an issue, and I was playing devil's advocate at the same time. But yes, that was a difficult story to cover because obviously we wanted to respect their privacy, and as you may recall, Donna Hanover refused to leave Gracie Mansion, and it was Giuliani had to move out, and he moved in with I think it was a pair of gay friends.
Yeah,
which made for a story in and of itself. So yes, we had to be very delicate about that, and it played out.
With that, it was, and plus, if you ask anybody in the NYPD, all my NYPD friends will tell you, yeah, he was rough. He didn't give any raises. And on top of that, there were not, besides that issue, I made the joke before, during that era, there was as many police commissioners in the NYPD as there were drummers in Spinal Tap. because you had Bratton from 94 to 96, and then you had Safer, who was the longest tenured of the bunch, and then Bernie Carrick at the end. So because he wanted to micromanage everything, not so much with the fire department. He let Tom Von Essen do his thing.
Yeah,
with the police department, he was pretty much a de facto PC. So, I mentioned sports earlier. Of course, I mentioned the spring of 94. But New York One being as hyper local as it was, we get the Yankee dynasty of 96 all the way through really 2001, that night in Arizona. But 2000 is interesting because talk about hyper local. The Yankees are playing the Mets in the World Series, and that's the biggest story of all. That was a fun week for the city. So at New York One, take me through covering that World Series.
Well, the funny thing about that is, the Yankee organization wasn't exactly friendly. And so our friends, my newscaster friends, would tell me they kind of dreaded the Yankees winning because it was more coverage that they had to do. And it was a little difficult for them. I have to be honest too, I was getting really tired of doing those ticker tape parades because there were a lot of things to say. And I would always be sitting in City Hall Park with whoever the news anchor or the sports anchor was at the time. And I had to really be up on my sports stuff. And, it didn't come naturally to me because I'm more on the news side, but I had to learn all the sports jargon. And I think I did a fairly good job, but those were heady times. And it's funny, at that time, I really thought, this Yankee dynasty is never going to die. They're just going to keep winning and winning and winning. And at some point you get like tired of winning, let somebody else have a chance. And I had a lot of Mets friends too. And they were like, come on, Mets, let's win one. And I covered the, what was it, when the Mets won in 80, was it 86? Yes.
I guess the Red Sox in 7.
News 12 was just starting at that point. And we weren't exactly on the air, but we were sort of rehearsing as if we were, and we were doing, we were doing sort of practice runs. And so I was covering the Mets when they won the World Series that year. That was great, in 86. So.
When they were in the World Series in 2015, as a Yankee fan, I mean, I'm not ashamed to admit it. I was rooting for them to win, mainly because I would love to hear a Met fan stop complaining for once.
Yeah.
Like, all right, have one here. Jeez, take it. But they didn't. Kansas City ended up beating them that year. But, they have a great team. We might get a Subway Series this year. Who knows? Because both teams are
this might be the Mets year. I mean, they started out like gangbusters, and maybe,
maybe.
They got to catch the Yankees.
And that's made it always stay that way. So, around this time as well, there's 2 blackouts. Blackout of 1999, I think in Washington Heights, that was cut off in the summer of 99. The citywide blackout of 2003. Now I'll get to that in a second because sandwiched in between that is 9/11. Yeah. And, there's footage of New York One's coverage is on YouTube. Pat Kiernan, to his credit, did a fabulous job under very difficult circumstances covering that. I mean, you'd been in New York for so long by this point. Everyone, rather you be a first responder, rather be in the business side, the news side, everybody knew somebody who was either injured that day or killed. So from that perspective, seeing all these funerals, it seems like every day the fire department especially was having a funeral for one of their own. There's the shock of it, and then there's recovery. First, the shock. I mean, even being in the news business, who could have ever envisioned something like that? Take me through, you mentioned you remember where you were. That day, where were you and what did you do?
Well, as you may recall, that was a primary election day in New York. Yes. And because I did politics, I would have been in the office at 9:00 when right around the time when the planes hit. But they told me not to come until 2:00 because we were going to cover the primary elections later in the day. And my daughter was just starting kindergarten, and my husband came running home because he dropped her off at school, and he said, turn on the TV. And I turned on the TV and I was like, oh my God, but at that point we thought it was a little propeller job. And I was glued to the TV, and I'll tell you, it was like my stomach fell into my guts. I just, like, the bottom fell out. It was horrible. And I thought, oh my God, is this the end? I mean, we lived through the first World Trade Center bombing, and we kind of dodged a bullet, as serious as that was. It was nothing like 9/11, but
No.
Anyway, I called into work and they said, get your ass in right now. And so I jumped in the car and I packed a little overnight bag. I figured I would stay for a long time. And I started driving. I was living in New Jersey and I got on Route 3 and it was a parking lot and I could not get through. And so I heard on the radio that Long Island Railroad was stopped, and the only thing running into the city at that point, because they closed all of the bridges and the tunnels, the only way to get into the city was Metro North. So I did a U-turn on Route 3, and I traveled, and I went up Garden State Parkway, and I went to Terrytown, and I parked the car, and I waited, and I waited, and I waited. It was like hours. And I finally got on a train to come into the city. And I'll never forget, there were two women sitting there, and you could, as we were crossing the Hudson, you could see in the distance the smoke billowing. And the one woman turned to the other and she said, "Oh my God." She said, "Do you realize how many people are going to die?" She said, "But how many more people are going to die years later from cancer?" She said, "That's toxic dust and it's going to kill them." And here we are, 20 years later, how sad, right? Anyway, I got into, I got into Grand Central and Terminal, and I walked out and I hailed a cab. Our studios were on West 42nd Street. And as soon as I got into a cab, it was a firefighter who stopped the cab and he said, "You got to take me down there. You got to take me down there." And I was like, "Absolutely." And I got out and I said, "Go ahead." So I walked the rest of the way. And it was so cathartic, the whole experience. And, you have to steel yourself. People are jumping out of windows. It's beyond reason what was happening. Like you couldn't fathom that anything like this could ever happen. And they offered us some mental health services, and we were on the air for 2 weeks solid, commercial free. And at that point, the women were trading clothes because they didn't want to look like we were wearing the same outfit every day for 2 weeks straight. And the other amazing thing that we did was, and I don't know whose idea it was, but in one of our studios, we set up a phone call-in show where people could call, and we had psychologists and psychiatrists standing by, and people would call up and discuss their anxiety or their fears, their panics, whatever. And I think we were able to help a lot of people get through this horrible crisis in the city. And I feel good about the fact that I think that was the event that put us on the map, actually. I mean, that was when the little engine that could became a big locomotive, and that's when I think people started to realize that New York One was competing with the networks, and we held our own. The other thing, I don't know if you're aware of this, but when the planes hit, most of the towers, the towers that the television
adjacent skyscrapers
set up.
TV antennas. Yeah,
the antennas. I couldn't think of the word. Most of the antennas were on the World Trade Center for all of the other networks, but ours was on the Empire State Building. So CNN was knocked off the air for quite a while, and so they at some point were just airing us, and then they came to our studio and they were broadcasting from our studios at New York One because they were knocked off the air. So we were really providing an invaluable service to the city, and I think that the city was very grateful for it.
I'll never forget one of my friends from the bomb squad, Kevin Barry, who was there for both 93 and 01, telling me he responded that morning. And as soon as because the bomb squad was right around the corner, as soon as he made the turn onto Washington Street with his partner, Detective Michael Mixon, and he saw the damage, Kevin had worked in the airline industry prior to joining the police department. And he turned to Mike and said, "This is no accident." And I'll never forget him telling me that. He knew for certain. And it's also the stories of I said, as I mentioned in my outline, the fallen heroes too, the people that you saw that you'd never see again. I mean, he ended up telling me about an emergency service cop, friend of his, John Delara, and the bomb squad and ESU works very closely together. He sees John walking in formation with the sergeant heading in, and John kind of jokingly turns to Kevin and Kevin goes, as if to say, I don't know what we're getting into. And Mike told me, as he told me, he's like, Mike, that's the last I saw of him. Never saw him again after that. He didn't make it that day. So there's so many stories like that. But I think a lot of news agencies did a good job of highlighting not just how these people died, but who they were, the lives they led, the lives of significance, especially for the first responder community that was decimated. And I mentioned the fire department particularly as well. So it was, as you said, it was the event that put them on the map. And then you get the blackout in 03. Now, it's not like the blackout of 77, different New York City then. It's not like the blackout of 99, different New York City then, even though it wasn't that long ago. Something happens on a large scale in New York City now. Even all these years later, people go, uh-oh, especially the people that were around in 2001 and remember that day well.
Right.
When that blackout happened, and we're not even 2 years removed from that day, and people are having that, are they trying to get us again moment?
Yeah.
Take me through that day when forget any antennas anywhere, nothing's working. And you talk about having to improvise, you really got to do it there because nobody has power.
No, you're talking about the 2003?
August of 2003.
Yeah, right. I was on vacation. This is interesting. I happened to be on vacation. It was August, and my cousin was visiting, and my cousin was in charge of emergency services in the city of Seattle. And so when the blackout happened, he said that's a rolling blackout. It's rolling all the way down from Canada all the way down the East Coast, and he knew it. I guess he had studied up on it. So I put him on the air, and so I called in and I said, we have an expert who can talk about the circumstances surrounding the blackout. I volunteered to come in, but they said there's no point. They were on generator power, and it was very hard to cover that. So I couldn't, but the city managed it pretty well. I got to say, they didn't have the looting and that they had that first time. Right. And so the city was better managed. Was Giuliani the mayor at
Bloomberg?
Oh, that was a Bloomberg. Wow. I'd forgotten. Yeah. The city has come really far. I mean, when I moved back to the city, it was 77. By the way, the blackout of 77, I was sitting, I'd just come home from college, and I was sitting, we lived on Roosevelt Island, and I was on the balcony of our little apartment there, and I looked out, and just like that, the lights went out. I was looking across the East River, and I just looked at Manhattan, and it just went from lots of lights to nothing. And I was like, holy moly. And there was a lot of destruction in the city at that one.
Yeah, that was the wild, wild west era of New York.
Yeah,
go ahead, my apologies.
I didn't want that to happen, and it didn't happen in 03. I was really impressed.
No, I think it goes back to the counterterrorism thing, because everybody's ears perked up, especially in the fire department, the police department. They jumped on it right away and were able to mitigate anything from happening from that standpoint. Preparedness is always key. To your point earlier about the Mets in '86, I wanted to highlight this. Pete Pranzo, retired street crime lieutenant, says, I was at City Hall plainclothes hunting for robbery suspects when you were at City Hall for that parade, or at least rehearsing it as well. So small world, he says, and it's true, very small world. So I'll hang on a few more things. You've been so generous with your time. You get to those work anniversaries, 15 years in 07 with New York One, 20 years in 2012, 25 in 2017. You're saying to yourself, wow, I've been here for a long time, man. And in a business where longevity is hard to come by and people move around like somebody's playing a game of chess, you were in one place for that long, which is incredible and a credit to you. What would you attribute it to?
Well, if you were to ask me about longevity, I would say you have to love what you're doing and hope that people love you doing it. And I was blessed because that's exactly what happened. And the news business is not for the faint of heart. You have to work so hard, and the news never sleeps. As you know, news breaks. When I would cover trials, I would have to stay from morning all the way to night. And if there was a long deliberation process, you'd stick with it the whole time. And so it's a calling to be a journalist. It really is a calling. You have to feel it in your every fiber of your being, you have to want to be there. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of folks, and this has happened for years, but a lot of people think there's so much glamour in the television news business, and they're going to make a lot of money. And yes, you see the big stars on the networks, but generally, no, there's not a lot of money, and there's not a lot of satisfaction initially. I mean, the satisfaction that I got from covering the news was being able to inform people of something that might have helped their lives or made their lives a little bit better, a little bit easier. But no, the pay is not great. I have to be honest, and you don't do it for the money, and you don't do it for the glamour, the fame, or any of that stuff. It's just that doesn't matter. What really, if you want to stay in the business of news, you really do have to have that fire in your belly and be motivated just to tell good stories. And that's how I felt, the whole time. And it was nice to be appreciated.
Of course. And you have many awards to your name. I mean, 3 of them, it's close to 40 awards in total. 3 of them are Emmys, which is very important. I had NJ Burkett last week on this show, and I asked him about that. He's from the New York chapter. I think he's the vice president of the New York chapter. Right. Or president, I should say. And so he mentioned that he loves, and it was funny because he's like, most people don't believe me when I say this, but he's like, it's one thing to win an Emmy, but I love giving Emmys to colleagues. And 3 times he was able to give one to you. So you departed for well-known reasons that we're not going to discuss here. If you want to look it up for the audience, look it up, just type it in and it'll pop up on Google. You left New York One at the end of 2019-20, around there, along with 4 other anchor women. And that was a time in which a lot happened. We get the pandemic, we get unrest, we get so much else going on during this time. I imagine it had to have driven you nuts not to be in the middle of it all, as you had been for so many years at New York One.
Well, so we left December 31st, and then along came January 6th. And it was eating my heart out. I'm watching this on TV, and I was like, whoa. The interesting thing is, though, I was like glued to the TV watching the coverage, and I was calling friends saying, tune in, watch this, and I'm almost, for my little friend group, I was being their reporter, and I was telling them what I was learning because they might have been at work or whatever. And oh boy, did I miss that. That was really, really hard. And I guess news is in my blood now, and I think my family is so sick of me because I'm constantly watching the news, and I'm boring, to be honest. But then again, you know what? The news should be boring to an extent. Yeah. I think part of the problem with the news business today is that boring doesn't make any money. There's no profit in boring, and so they do everything they can to gin up the ratings, and they do that by sensationalizing the stories and the coverage, and that's unfortunate. I think that's kind of the downfall of the news business today. But that's a whole other tangent we can get into on another day.
Let me ask you, the national aspect of news, different story, but locally, especially in New York, where you've spent so much of your career, do you like the direction it's heading in locally, at least?
No, not really.
Why is that?
Opinion journalism is taking over, and what is it about the news that makes the news so valuable? Facts. And that day that Kellyanne Conway said that there are alternate facts was, I think, a very dark day for all of us in the news business, because as soon as you start talking about alternate facts, which is just opinion, you lose the trust of your audience. And if you lose the trust of your audience, then there's no point in going on TV. I mean, you have to speak the truth, and people have to respect you for that. And if they don't, everybody has an echo chamber that they are listening to now. And so I think we're responsible for our own demise at this point. All this, opinion journalism, if you want to hear opinions in the news, then turn to Trevor Noah or Steve Colbert, because at least they're entertaining. But everybody has an opinion. You remember Daniel Patrick Moynihan that, had that great line, you're entitled to your own opinion. You are not entitled to your own facts. And at this point, everybody's entitled to their own facts. And if your facts don't match my facts, then I'll turn the channel and watch somebody who will validate the facts that I feel, and then there's no point in having a news operation. I know I'm really down on it. It's sort of a Pandora's box that's been opened up with all of this, opinion journalism. And, there's still some great reporting out there, but generally speaking, I don't see how we're going to recover from it, unfortunately.
So I'll ask you. No, that's fine. I appreciate you highlighting that. That might be the highlight clip of this show. It's a good take that you had there. I'll see when I go back and find a highlight to put out tomorrow morning. But that said, I mean, before I get to the concluding segment, I guess you're at a stage where you've accomplished so much. You've checked off a lot of boxes. I feel like you still have so much to give. You have so much energy. You have so much passion. And what have you been up to since? And what do you hope to get back into the business somehow, some way? Do you hope to start something like this, like a podcast? What do you want to do?
Well, I'll tell you, the timing was interesting. My husband has Parkinson's disease and it would have gotten to an advanced stage. So I might have had to quit regardless because he needs full-time care. So that's eaten up a lot of my time. I tried to continue doing theater reviews with this wonderful group called the New York Stage Review, and it's a bunch of theater critics who are no longer working for any formal publication. And that was great for a short while, but it was just too difficult for me to see the show, to travel and take the time to see the shows. I couldn't be away from home that long, so I had to stop that. But with the other 4 women that were part of our group that left on the same day, we are working on a podcast that's called The 5 of Us, and we're talking about, we haven't released it yet. We have 5 in the can, and we're working very shortly to debut our podcast. And basically, what we're interested in it because we're also writing a book together, and our what we're focusing on is the workplace, specifically targeting women, the perils and pitfalls of the workplace for women, whether it's ageism or sexism or racism or toxic workplace, bad bosses, etc. And the book is going to be sort of a guide for women to hopefully help avoid any of the things that women have to deal with in the workplace. And when we left our jobs, we heard from hundreds of women, literally hundreds of women who were telling us their tales of woe regarding their work life. And we didn't realize how pervasive it is, and then all of a sudden you heard about the Great Resignation and you kind of understand what motivated that. People just don't want to take it anymore. They're mad as hell. They don't want to take it. And so I think we're sort of on that crest. We're hitting that. I think it's key what the workplace should be and what it is, and trying to help people square the two.
Well, this has been great. Stick around, because now it's going to get tough. It's time for the rapid fire. 5 hit-and-run questions from me, 5 answers from me. You can say pass if you want.
Okay.
Are you ready? All right, here we go. First, funniest story you ever covered?
It's not a story that I covered. You could say it's a story that covered me because I was on the anchor desk and, I was live broadcasting, and Lassie the dog happened to be visiting our newsroom. And I'm not quite sure why, but I think it was for the parenting segment. And the handlers thought it would be kind of cute to bring Lassie up on the anchor desk and say hello to me on live TV. So they brought Lassie up, and then they signaled for Lassie to jump and by the way, Lassie's a boy, not a girl, even though you're supposed to think that a female Lassie is a male. And they had Lassie put his paws up on the anchor desk, and all of a sudden, Lassie did a poo-poo on the anchor desk on my feet. And and they were like horrified, and I didn't know what to say. And the handler came over and was very apologetic and said that Lassie was not feeling well on the flight over from LA or whatever. But yes, I had Lassie doo-doo on my feet, and then we had to go to commercial and we had to clean it all off, and that was rough.
And now in the papers.
And you had to get rid of the smell, and I had to stay on the anchor desk and clean up, and it was not pretty. It was not pretty.
Second, favorite interview you've ever done?
That's a tough one because I've had so many great interviews. But I would have to say Angela Lansbury. She was so open and so generous with her time and her life, and she was revealing things about herself that I was really surprised about. And this is a woman who's been interviewed 1 million times, and she was willing to open up to me, and I was really, really grateful for that.
Third, interview you wish you could conduct?
Oh gosh, off the top of my head, Barack Obama. I would love to interview Obama, and I would love to get him to give me some really honest answers about what was going on in the White House. I really would love that. Actually, you know what? I kind of take that back. Who I would love to interview is Mitch McConnell. I would love to interview Mitch McConnell because I think what he really believes and what he's saying publicly are very different. And I would love to lay him out. I really would. I'd love to, put his words to the test. I would love that because the man is so powerful, and whatever he says, people listen and they do, and he's changed the course of history. But I would love to put him on the spot. I'd love to get some honest answers from him.
Fourth, favorite bar or restaurant in New York City?
That's an easy one. West Bank Cafe on West 42nd Street. That's a hangout for theater people, and I've gone there for like the last 20 something years. Oh my gosh, like 25 years I've been going there. The owner is Steve Olson. He's a great guy, and it's just every time I go in there, there's a great story to hear, whether it's one of the patrons or Steve, the owner.
And finally, what advice would you give anyone looking to enter your profession?
You got to love it. Don't expect to get rich. And for God's sake, stick to the facts.
Simple.
That's what I would say.
Simple. Well, this has been great. Don't sign off yet. We'll say goodbye off the air, so stick around. Anything that you want to give a shout out to, anything you want to promote, fire away.
No, but look for the five of us on wherever you get your podcasts, maybe Spotify or Facebook Live, wherever. We'll find an outlet for it. That's coming soon to a device or screen near you, and look for our book, which will come out eventually.
Well, my apologies, but and look for that as well. My suggestion briefly, put it on YouTube too in simulcast form.
Oh, I meant YouTube. Said FaceTime. I meant YouTube. Sorry.
No, Facebook Live helps too. So before we go, I'm at 988 subscribers. I'm 12 away from 1,000. It's free. It is free. I am begging you. Please click the subscribe button. If you do not, you know what I'm doing? I'm going to send Roma after you. Do you want that? Do you want Roma to show up at your door? No. So in order not to piss her off, please get me to 1,000 if you would be so nice enough. All you have to do is click the subscribe button. I'm not that terrible. I'm not that ugly. I know I'm wearing a Rangers jersey. Some of you may not root for the Rangers, but that's okay. We'll look past that. But yeah, my audience is great, and I appreciate you guys. Shout out in order to the Pranzos, Raquel and Peter, Ruth Ann Griffin, Steve Zaslavsky, Steve-O, retired NYPD Lieutenant Mary Susan Schilling, tuning in via LinkedIn, Michael Chan as well. So coming up next on the Mike the New Haven podcast, that is Friday, of course. He was an engineman in Brooklyn for the majority of his career, finished out as a lieutenant, had a lot of experience during the 80s when Brooklyn was quite frankly the borough of fire. He is retired FDNY Lieutenant Richie Dumig, and he'll join me for the Mike the New Haven miniseries, Volume 17, that is, of the best of the bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite. So in the meantime, on behalf of Roma Torre, I'm Mike Colón, and we will see you next time. Take care, everybody. Have a great rest of your night. you.